In 1914, as the world drifted towards war, a strange event was reported in the skies across Shropshire. It started with the sound of a horn, and then hooves thundered overhead. People claimed to see a Saxon lord leading a host of spectral warriors across the sky. A wild hunt that was said to appear every time England faced grave danger. But the leader of this hunt isn't just some random ghost of folklore, he was a real historic figure, a thegn that resisted Norman invasion. However, over the centuries, history and legend have merged, and it's kind of hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. This is the story of Edrich and the Wild Hunt. The Normans called him Eadric Sylvaticus. The Anglo-Saxon chronicles called him Edric Savage. In modern English, that translates to Eadric the Wild. To the Normans, wild was probably meant to sound as an insult, untamed and uncivilized, and to the Saxons, it was probably more a badge of respect. He was a lord that preferred to sleep in the woods rather than in a house because that would make him soft. His origins are a little uncertain, though he was probably tied to a powerful Mercian family under Ethelred the Unready. But whatever his precise lineage, he emerges from the historic record as a rebellious thegn at one of the most crucial turning points in English history. After 1066, the Norman invasion was not a done deal. In places like the Welsh marshes and the border counties, rebellions continued, and Edrich was one of the men leading them. For a while, he became one of the most stubborn opponents to Norman rule. In 1067, he attacked Hereford Castle, and 2 years later, he burnt the town of Shrewsbury and besieged the castle. That alone would have been enough to earn him a reputation, and long before he became a figure of folklore, Edrich was already the sort of man that history was going to remember. So these were tumultuous times, and Edrich was already the sort of larger-than-life character that would cross the line over into legend. And over time, he becomes associated with one of Northern Europe's oldest mythic traditions, the Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt appears in various forms across Northern Europe, but the basic image is pretty much always the same: a host riding across the sky, often through the darkness of winter, as an omen of war, death, or just generally bad things. Sometimes just to see the hunt would mean death, and it was customary to throw yourself to the ground and look away. Some people think the Wild Hunt might be a way of describing the violent storms that can hit during winter, something vast and dangerous riding across the land. In some versions, it's gods hunting for souls, in others it's cursed riders who can never rest. In Shropshire, that hunt is led by wild Edrich. In one strand of the story, Edrich is tied to a faerie wife named Godda, a woman that he meets deep in the woods, and she agrees to marry him on the condition that he never speaks ill of her sisters. He does, of course, and one day when she's late back for breakfast, he snaps and blames them. Realising too late his error, he watches in horror as Godda vanishes in front of him, never to be seen again. Edrich later dies heartbroken, and the hunt becomes an eternal search for his lost love. It's a familiar story where the crossing between the mortal world and the other world is fragile, and just one mistake is enough to break it. But there is another more commonly told version of the hunt, where after the failed siege of Shrewsbury, Edrich retreats to the woods and eventually makes peace with William the Conqueror. However, to his people, this peace is seen as a betrayal, so he and his wife are taken and sealed beneath the hills of East Shropshire and trapped in the lead mines. In some versions of the story, it's the wizard Merlin that traps him in there, and that won't be our only connection to Arthurian lore. From this point on, Edrich becomes more of a cursed hero, where he is trapped and unable to die until England is restored to its pre-Norman state. This is a harsher fate than one normally reserved for our sleeping heroes. Arthur is at rest until England needs him, where Edrich, by contrast, is condemned to remain trapped beneath the hills and only allowed to ride out when England faces grave danger. And that's where our war omens come in. A lot of the pre-war sightings of Edrich fall well and truly into the category of some people say. It's reported in blogs and articles, but there's no names or dates to pin down any of the sightings. However, there is one version in the work of Charlotte Byrne from the late 19th century, which puts a little more meat on the bones. There, a woman from Rorrington recalls seeing the hunt in late 1853, early 1854 when she was a girl. She was out with her father, and as the hunt approached, he told her to look away. But she didn't. and she recalls seeing Eadric as a Saxon warrior with a sword and a horn, and beside him was a fair-haired woman with a white headband and a dagger. Behind them rode a host of ghostly warriors. And then in March of 1854, Britain joined the Crimean War, a conflict that gave us the Thin Red Line, Florence Nightingale, and the disastrous charge of the Light Brigade. But this isn't the only story attached to Edric's imprisonment. Local miners for centuries have reported hearing tapping sounds which have led them towards rich lodes of ore. They say that it is Edric and his men guiding the way. But the tapping in the mines is another story that's repeated across Northern Europe. Pretty much every mining community has stories of beings that live underground that can warn, mislead, or reveal great wealth. But here again, the old patterns are being tied to one local figure. Edrich is no longer just an 11th century lord resisting foreign invasion. What strikes me most about the tales of Wild Edrich is none of them are entirely unique. For example, the Wild Hunt is told in many versions across Northern Europe, often led by Odin leading a host of the dead through winter storms, but there are other versions with other leaders and other meanings. For example, there is one in Germany that is led by a woman that would prefer to hunt rather than go to heaven, and she's known as Frau Godda, which is a name not entirely unlike Godda, Edric's faerie wife. And speaking of Godda, the idea of a broken promise to a faerie wife is not particularly unique either. The one that jumps straight to my mind is the story of the Lady of Llanifan Fac, where a farmer met a beautiful woman coming from a lake, and she agrees to marry him on the condition that he never strikes her 3 times without reason. Eventually he does, and she then returns to the lake, taking all of their farm animals with them. And as I've already mentioned, the tapping in the mines is not unique either. You've got the knockers of Cornish folklore, who became the Tommy knockers in the US. You've got the cutty soames and blue caps of northern mining culture, and the kobolds over in Germany. Different names, same basic idea. Creatures that live underground that could help or hinder local miners. And the returning hero motif is a common one as well. The obvious comparison is King Arthur, who will return when England needs him once more. But other real historic figures have also been tied to similar legends, such as Olaf Tryggvason, who disappeared after the Battle of Svolder, or King Harold Godwinson after he took his arrow to the eye in 1066 and couldn't see the point of it. The only difference is Edric's version has a bit more of a sting in the tale, whereas the others fell nobly in battle and are at rest until they're needed once more. Edric made peace and is now forced to endure, tied to an England that can never be restored, which makes him more of a tragic figure. So Edrich feels less like one story, but many stories folded into one man. But that's kind of what I like about it. It gives a local face to much wider traditions. They've been shaped and moulded to fit the woods and hills of Shropshire. He's a one-man body of folklore that haunts the edges of history. Now, of course, if you've ever seen a ghostly horde riding across the sky, or if you've got any other folklore tales you want me to cover, let me know in the comments below. But if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching.